Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and be starting here shortly. Just wanted to let you all into the room and say thank you for joining us for our Wednesday webinar. We're still waiting for Mr. Kim Cooper to join us, so please mute your microphones and stand by. We'll be starting shortly. It's 1 o'clock now, but we still have a few folks joining, so why don't we give it just one more minute and we'll have any stragglers join the call. I'll go ahead and kind of kick off a little bit of a welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this week for our Wednesday webinar. My name is Nick Stout. I'm the IR Communications Director. And we are fortunate enough to have the IREC Commission Chair, Kim Cooper, with us today. He has graciously agreed to give us a little bit of an IREC update. So Kim, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
We are going to kind of kick this off. I kind of warned Kim I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit, and we have a couple of fun questions that we are going to ask him, which will then kind of lead into a little bit of a presentation from him about what's going on with IREC, and then we'll kind of open the floor for questions at the end of the call. So without much further ado, I think we got the last of our stragglers in the call. We'll go ahead and get started. So Kim, I wanted to ask you a little bit more of like a perspective question for our, our caller, or not our callers, but our webinar attendees today. So you are the chair of IREC, along with being the commissioner, you work as a realtor and you're a member of your community, and you have to abide by the rules and regulations put forth by IREC. And I was just curious if you could speak to us a little today about what it's like for you to be in that position and how you're able to balance those various responsibilities for yourself, your customers, your constituents, and your community.
Well, like I tell my boys, it's not always easy to do the right thing, but it's always the right thing. So, you have to, I think, apply your oath under the Code of Ethics as a realtor in conjunction with Idaho law regarding real estate, and they're not dissimilar. So again, it's as simple as just behaving yourself and doing the right thing in all of those roles as a real estate broker and as a realtor and as the North District Commissioner.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. We are going to kind of give you some time to kind of go through what's going on in IREC lately, but I kind of thought I'd ask you a couple of fun questions at the start of this. So if you don't mind, I'm just curious if you can share with us, since you've become the IREC Commission Chair, could you tell us what the most egregious violation you've seen so far has been?
Well, we've seen many. One that stands out most in my mind is the individual referred to as the spitter. There was a fellow, I would not use the term gentleman, and you'll know why in a moment. There was a fellow who had an unsuccessful listing presentation and refused to leave the seller's home. She escorted him to the door. She kind of gave him a nudge out the door. He shoved her and spit in her face. And this person had been disciplined. His license had been suspended. He was petitioning for an exemption to have his license reinstated. We declined that request because we didn't feel that he demonstrated the characteristics that he could operate in the public's interest.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answer there. So kind of in that same vein, in your opinion, what's the quickest way for a licensee in Idaho to lose their license, and why?
Well, a flagrant violation of Idaho real estate law would be one reason. IREC's role preferred role is to educate, not to litigate. And I have found that our team of investigators are very good in their interview process of determining whether or not that person is remorseful for their actions, whether or not they will agree to what's called a stipulation, and I'll explain that process a little bit later. The stipulation is that, yes, you have enough evidence that I could be convicted of this if it went to a hearing, so I'll acquiesce and I'll agree to your fines and continued education with no credit, much like a professional standards committee would do on a local level at your local board. Oftentimes professional standards will dictate that the punishment be education without credit. We do the same thing. If a person does not cooperate in that investigation, then we may need to take steps to, if we can't correct the behavior through education, then we may be left with no options other than to suspend the license. But we as commissioners, of course, we're all volunteers. We trust the judgment of the investigators. Several of our investigators are retired law enforcement, so they know quite well how to interrogate people and how to sort through the chaff to find the wheat, as it were. So we rely strongly on their opinions and their recommended punishment, I guess.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. I have one more of these pre-presentation questions for you, and this might kind of help you segue into your presentation. So feel free to kind of jump in wherever you'd like. But the last question I was curious before we got started today is, are there any negative trends that you're seeing with violations or licensees? And, is there anything about that you'd like to share with our webinar participants today?
There's always something, Nick. The latest flagrant violation that we're seeing is electronic forgery. It's too easy with the various signing platforms that are available on the internet for people to say, oh, the transaction coordinator may say, gosh, you missed the initials there. I need those initials or you're not getting your commission check. Well, if the offender can't reach their client for the sake of expediency, oftentimes they're emailing that document to themselves, set up to sign, and filling in those initials themselves. It's not that difficult for our investigators to identify the IP address where that signature came from. And we're finding with exceeding frequency that people are forging documents. There's something about, I don't know, because they're not using a pen, that it's maybe too easy or it just doesn't seem like that big a deal, but forgery is always a big deal. And without a power of attorney from your client, any documents you execute on their behalf are deemed a forgery. So that's the most concerning current trend.
All righty. And I know I've heard you speak on that before, and yeah, it seems to me like this access to technology and this access to all these different means just kind of make that a little bit too tempting. So I appreciate you kind of speaking on that again today. So that is kind of what I had prepared for our pre-presentation stuff. So why don't we go ahead and I know you have a little bit of an update for us about what's going on with IREC. So we'll go ahead and let you do that. And then once your update is completed, we'll go ahead and open up the floor to our participants for maybe any questions they have for you, if that works for you. Sure.
I'd like to start with kind of a definition of what IREC is. IREC, of course, is the Idaho Real Estate Commission, which is now under the Department of Occupational and Professional Licensing, been combined with, I think, 41 different bureaus. So this division of occupational and professional licensing then includes not only real estate agents, but insurance agents and contractors, so HVAC, electricity, plumbing. That has been a bit of a challenge incorporating all of those people into one bureau. I, of course, am the North District Commissioner. All commissioners have to have been real estate brokers for at least 5 years. And as Nick said, I'm also the chair this year. Our South Central District and Vice Chair Commissioner is Jill Stone. She's from Twin Falls. The Southwestern District is Elizabeth Hume. She's from Boise. The Southeast District is Michael Johnston, who many of you know. And then several years ago, it was determined that we needed a member from the public at large. And we're fortunate to have secured the public member, Martin Espiel, who's a rangeland manager for the Department or the Bureau of Land Management. So pretty well balanced. Each of the districts is represented. My district runs from the Snake River to the Canadian border. Martin brings a good perspective from the public at large, which is what his role is. And so I think we've got a very well functioning board at this time. Under IREC is also the Education Council. So these are the people who determine what new classes are appropriate and help in the development of those with our talented staff at IREC. South Central District is Heidi Kasdorf. She is the chair from Twin Falls. Southwestern District is Carolyn Senard. She's from Boise. South District is our outgoing IR president, Patrick Malone, from Idaho Falls. North District, which is my district, is Debbie Lawrence of Moscow, Idaho. And the commissioner representative, the commission appoints one commission member to serve on the Education Council, and that is Elizabeth Hume. And of course, our executive officer is Michelle Bird, who I believe most of you have had the opportunity to meet. What are we doing at IREC? Well, we're implementing, and this will be by the first of the year, a team notification. The form is, I think, currently on the IREC website, and it'll be mailed out to all managing brokers to register their team so that we know who the team leader is and who the responsible broker is, and hopefully who the team members are. Once we receive that input, we'll be able to create a database so you can search for team leaders and brokerages on the IREC website. That'll be by the first of the year, I'm sure. The deadline, the moving target deadline has been November, but I think it's safe to bet that it won't be up later than January. Excuse me. We felt that this was necessary because of comments from not only other agents, but from the public at large, that they can't figure out who the broker is that supervises the particular agent that they have a problem with. In many cases, we've discovered that the agent doesn't know who their broker is. They are familiar with their team leader in most cases, but they have no idea who they're actually responsible to. So we're hoping to kind of clean some of that up and make it easier to identify teams and their agents. As I said, we were combined with several other licensing bureaus, and we have been moved to the former HP campus on Chinden Boulevard. This has been a major undertaking there. In addition to moving all of these different offices into one campus, there's been remodeling. Different boards, of course, have different needs for technology and things. So all of that has been very stressful for staff. Not so stressful for commissioners. As I tell my clients, I don't move furniture. So it's been relatively easy for me, but that's been a very challenging undertaking for our staff. Due to COVID, we began, Gail Brixey, our auditor, began doing audits remotely. And that has been a real benefit for us because Gail is now able to get through many more audits in a month because she's not having to drive to physical offices to gather the information she needs to do her job. So that's been a real plus, and that will continue. Another development for the benefit of our licensees is that you can now do your pre-licensing course online. So you no longer have to sit in a classroom for 90 hours. You can do that virtually. And those are moderated and supervised, and they're very interactive, but it gives people a lot more flexibility to be able to qualify for to get their Idaho real estate license. As I said, from an enforcement perspective, licensee forgery is the top trend we're seeing right now. Another one is failure to account, which the complaints that we've been receiving are from agents allowing buyer customers or buyer clients to visit properties without an agent being present. Just how they facilitate that varies. You know, maybe they leave a key under the mat or whatever, but that you don't do that. That is a punishable offense. Failure to disclose adverse material facts is the third item on the list for enforcement trends. And that's pretty obvious. I think that if you see a 3-inch wide crack in the foundation, you probably should point that out. If you know, of course, an adverse material fact is anything about the property that affects its marketability. And so be aware of that and be sure to disclose anything that affects the marketability of that property. And when we always see, and we continue to see, is unlicensed practice. Most often, these transactions are conducted by out-of-state brokers, and they're largely commercial properties. What has happened is that we see large transactions, one being a mall in southern Idaho, another one being a family of franchise operations under one ownership, that were brokered by people that don't have an office in Idaho. Several years ago, the commission tried to make it easy for those people to be in compliance by getting a cooperative broker's license, which means that they need to communicate with a commercial, in this case, a commercial broker in Idaho. And for $100 filing fee, they can file a form with IREC that allows them to practice their craft in Idaho under the direction of that Idaho licensee, yet they're not doing it. Part of the problem is that we're restricted in the amount of money that we can fine each offense, and that limit is $5,000. What in discussions with the investigations, however, we've discovered that many of our stipulations, and I will address that and define that for you in just a minute. Many of our stipulations are just the cost of, perceived as the cost of doing business. So they haven't really put a lot of attention on getting registered with the state as a cooperating broker. That again is a continuing trend. So the way that the process works, when staff receives a complaint, they can evaluate it pretty quickly to determine whether it needs to go to the investigators. Other than simple continuing ed or failure to renew E&O insurance and things, most of those cases will go to investigation, and they'll begin their interrogatory process with the parties mentioned, the complainant and the respondent, to determine if an investigation is warranted, a deeper investigation is warranted. That comes to the commission in the form of a probable cause memo, and that will be signed by Executive Director Bird, requesting approval of the Board of Commissioners to move forward with a full-blown investigation because this has been determined by the investigators to be an egregious act. Once the interviews are completed, the investigators will recommend punishment for that act and bring it to us in the form of a stipulation if they've negotiated that successfully with the respondent, which they usually do. Those stipulations then usually cite several different areas of the Idaho real estate law. And as I began to say, in discussions with investigators, we've determined that yes, we are limited to a $5,000 fine, but in this particular stipulation, there are 3 different offenses. So let's fine them $5,000 for each of those, and maybe they'll get the message. We've not tested that yet, but hopeful that will help alleviate some of those complaints that we're receiving. For edification, the kinds of things go beyond the 4 that I've already described, the kinds of things that are coming to us as grievances, if you would, or offenses. That fraudulent misrepresentation, fortunately, we only had 1 of those in the last year. 5 advertising violations. There's a lot of insignificant stuff, but this is something that boggles me. Failure to complete, out of 598 cases, 407 of them were for failure to complete CE. Now, I don't understand it, but here's what we've done with regard to that. One of the problems that we discovered was in the post licensing. So your first renewal period, you have to have those credits with specific classes. Well, people were just taking any classes and submitting the CEs. They had enough CEs, but they didn't have the right classes. The board made a determination a couple of months ago that rather than fine these people for an honest mistake, what we will do now in our new policy is that they will have 30 days to take the correct courses and avoid being fined for the lack of having those courses upon renewal. So that's again illustrates the flexibility, I guess, of IREC in that our first objective is not to punish. I'm sure if you get a letter from IREC, other than your annual renew your E&O insurance letter, you probably have a little bit of panic because we're not the enemy. We're here. Our first charge under the governor's tutelage is to protect the consumer, which of course is why we have to bring people up for doing things that aren't in the consumer's best interest. Agency violations, we only had 7 of those. Unlicensed practice, we had 5. Failure to maintain E&O is 117 different people. And again, it boggles me because I know I get letters. I get a letter for my brokerage and a letter for myself as an agent saying, hey, your E&O is due in about a month. So maybe you want to put that at the top of your list and pay that. We're finding too many people are not doing that. And as I mentioned earlier, failure to disclose adverse material fact, we had 11 of those. By license type, and this is another one that confounds me. Certainly this is not a surprise. Out of the 598 cases, 479 of them were from salesperson's violations. But what struck me as I reviewed these statistics is that designated brokers, we had 64 of them that we had to investigate last year. That boggles me. We've closed 572 of those 598 cases. 58 of them were for insufficient evidence. 1 was for no action violation. 220 were the stipulations I described just moments ago. So we have a probable cause memo, then a full-blown investigation, and then the investigators recommended stipulation that the respondents agreed to. Yes, I agree, I violated these sections of the code. I agree that this is a fair and reasonable fine, and I agree to take the continuing ed credit. And there's a time limit on that. And that varies by case. But so back to one of Nick's pre-questions, if they refuse to fulfill what they've stipulated to, then their license would be suspended. We entered into formal actions with 257 of these offenders and dismissed 13 of them for no evidence, as opposed to insufficient evidence, which again was 58 people. So the types of actions that were taken, a cease and desist letter, we set out 2 of those. Fines and civil penalties, 433. Formal reprimands 2, and that number is going to go up because formal reprimand will be issued for people failing to comply with our 30-day guideline of getting those the credits corrected, taking the correct classes, and they would be given a letter of reprimand. Revocation, again, back to one of Nick's previous questions, we revoked 5 licenses last year. We suspended 2. 38 people got a reprimand from staff, and 2 people voluntarily surrendered their license based on the results of the investigation. So again, our staff as a whole are doing a fantastic job amidst the burden of moving and incorporating and changing their environment to a move across town, but they're functioning pretty well. We have had some problems with the telephone system. Everybody's email address changed. So if you've had some challenges getting a hold of the right person, go to the IREC website and look at what their new email address is. They'll now have DOPL, or Department of Occupational Professional Licensing, DOPL will be a part of their email address where formerly they were IREC. So do we, Nick, I think that pretty much sums up my report.
All righty. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for some questions. You can also enter any questions you might have in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Kim?
I have a question.
Okay,
This is Becky and Rico Crum. How are you doing, Kim?
good. How are you, Becky?
Good.
Thanks for coming.
You bet. One of the questions I have, this has come up more than I've ever, maybe I'm hearing this more just because of my position on the board this year, and people get to call me for things. But the biggest complaint we're hearing more than anything else recently is people entering the properties when they're appointment only and they're supposed to make an appointment and just using the lockbox and just going in. And this also includes home inspectors that have shown up that don't have our MLS key here in the area, and also some appraisers that have shown up according to them. And one of these entries was, one of the agents told me that the entry was coming into a home of a ex-police chief who has it was a vacant home, but it was still had cameras on it. And he was seeing them come in, and even though it said, you know, you have to have an appointment, they were just coming in and saying, oh, and then apologizing. Oh, sorry. So this one particular agent that's had this problem over and over again told me that in the state of Oregon, if you enter a property, you're fine without permission. When it says in the MLS that you have to get permission, that they have a very serious fine of like $1,000 right off the top, so that there is not a problem. Is there ever, and I'm not suggesting that that's what we need to do. I'm just wondering if if you're hearing this across the board, and if there has been some consideration of maybe more of a fine, so that people will actually read and not just say, oh, oops, sorry. And now we have clients that are really upset that we are not controlling the entry into their properties.
Thanks, Becky. And that's one of the most common offenses that we see. Again, failure to account is the section of the code that falls under. If you do not have written permission from the seller to allow access for inspectors, appraisers, agents without an appointment, then you're liable under failure to account as the listing agent for allowing people to go in. Now, if it's an unannounced agent who has a key to get into the home, that's not so much on you, it's on that individual agent. But we are looking at more serious penalties for that, because it is one of the most frequent complaints that we're seeing. So the key begins with you folks, and educate your agents that if you have an inspection, you need to be there, unless you have it in writing from your seller that you can let inspectors, appraisers, etc. And often that is the case, that they can come in unescorted, but without permission is a no-no. Can't do that. And we're looking at our fine structure overall to make sure we have teeth in our enforcement.
Kim, we had a comment in the chat. Jim Paulson asked, wouldn't using a CBS code cure the problem, since they wouldn't have the code to access it without the seller's permission? I was just wondering if you wanted to comment on that.
Well, CBS codes are kind of cumbersome for well-behaving agents, but for those who misbehave, and as Becky said, one of her agents has had this happen several times, that might be a good block for that particular agent to begin using CBS codes on all of his or her lockboxes. And that's something that's a broker decision of whether or not you want to require that. IREC can't require that.
Hey, Kim.
Yes.
David Hensley.
Hi, David.
Hey, want to tell you how much we appreciate you coming in today for the Wednesday webinar. And along the lines of IREC being a resource, my question is, as a licensee, what scenarios should I consider giving IREC a call? When should I think about reaching out to IREC, and what does that look like? Because I'm sure we have some licensees on the webinar today who probably are unfamiliar with some of the resources that you guys provide and when they should reach out to you. So give us an idea about that.
Well, a couple of things that make it easier for you. And one is it's still a black and gold book that you got a year ago in July. We have not reprinted yet because we're making adjustments to the indexing and things to make it easier to use, more user friendly, I guess would be the term. They're referred to the guidelines section of that law book. Again, it's still, none of the laws have changed. So it's still a good tool, and there are a lot of good answers there for a variety of scenarios. If you have specific questions or you want to file a complaint, then you need to contact IREC. If you're filing a complaint for misbehavior, then you'd want to contact investigations. Don Morse is our chief investigator. If it's education or if it's a licensing issue, you want to go to Jessima Rosewig. You can find contacts for all the different departments on the IREC website. So those are really good resources. And I have always found, even before I became a commissioner, the staff at IREC to be very accommodating and good about returning calls and things. Again, I want to temper that by reiterating the comment that they have had challenges with phones and emails over this last several months. So if you're not getting a call in 10 minutes, don't panic. I'm sure someone will get to you, provided that you went to the IREC site, pick the department that you believe covers where you have a question, and leave a message for that person or send them an email or both. Or in a perfect world, they'll pick up their phone and answer. But I think you'll find everybody very accommodating. I certainly have. Thank you for that question, David. I see a chat question here about online self-paced courses to obtain an Idaho broker's license be on the horizon. I don't know that. That's really an education committee function to recommend different types of training. And then, of course, we have people on staff who administer the education component. We've not taken any action as of this date, however.
Kim, I have a question if you don't mind. I'm just curious, with legislative session coming up right around the corner, is there anything on the horizon for IREC as far as legislative changes, budget changes, or other issues that you kind of want to give us a preview on?
Nothing currently, Nick. Again, completing the amalgamation of these various bureaus on the Chinden campus is kind of the fly in the ointment at this point. And dealing with that, we have had discussions on maybe legislation and another session, but nothing coming up for this year. And David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think IR has anything either, do you?
Well, we're currently looking at a legislative agenda, and I think that could be the topic of a future webinar. But what I would say is that anything we want to do, we know we have a great partner in the IREC Commission and the commissioners, and you share your legislative agenda with us when appropriate, and we do the same with you so that we can get that feedback and cooperation when that's possible. So I would tell people to stay tuned on the IR front, because I do anticipate a few things. But you know, our great relationship with you, I think, leads us to always be able to improve that legislation or those ideas as we move forward. So just want to thank you for that personally.
Well, thank you for that validation, David. And I'll tell the group here that's online that as a commissioner, I am also a member, all of the commissioners are members of ARELO. That is the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials. As such, we have 2 conferences each year. And one of the most valuable parts of those conferences for me are attending roundtables, for commissioner roundtables, broker roundtables, whatever they might be. The interesting thing to me initially, excuse me, was that no matter what part of the Western Hemisphere you operate from, and this is an international organization, you have the same problems with agents. What I found dissimilar was the relationship that we have with Idaho Realtors. Other commissioners in other jurisdictions, I found, don't have the cooperation that we've had a great experience with IR. So kudos from you, and back to you, David. It's a great relationship and we value it greatly. And kind of as a statement of support, we do collaborate with Idaho Realtors on upcoming legislative issues because they're always quick to notify us of what their concerns are and what they would like to accomplish. And generally, we're on board with them.
Kim, this is Deborah Hall.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi there. My question is on punishments that are handed down by the commission. How do they determine what those are? Because I've had knowledge of some issues that have happened in past years. And personally, I have felt that the punishment was not stiff enough. I think the punishment needs to be a deterrent. And I was always told that, you know, well, they're apprehensive about taking away someone's livelihood. And so do they have, you know, a chart of what they go by, or how is that determined?
For minor infractions, Deborah, there is a chart for CE credits, E&O insurance, and things like that, things that staff handle in-house. For investigations, I think, you know, and we've had discussions. We have a relatively new chief investigator in Don Morse, and he is on board with the commission because initially we had the same conversation. In fact, I've had initiated several conversations as a commissioner, stating exactly what you've stated, that this is ridiculous for a commercial property generating $180,000 commission. You're fining them $1,500 because they didn't have a license to operate in Idaho.
Right.
So that has been a focus of the current board. And we continue to look at each case on its own merits or lack of merit to determine. And so when investigations comes to us at an regular IREC meeting, they will bring forward several stipulations. Now, those of you who attended the convention in Coeur d'Alene, we didn't have any on the agenda at that point, and that was unfortunate. It was a very abbreviated meeting. However, generally, we're going to hear a half a dozen stipulations, and oftentimes that will generate objections from the board of commissioners stating that, you know, gosh, this guy took the wrong core class and you're fining him $500. That seems kind of egregious. Or this firm just earned a $200,000 commission for sale of a commercial property, and you're fining them $1,500. That hardly seems appropriate. Right. The other thing we look at is frequency of offenses, and we do have some that past Chairman Gamblin 2 chairs ago referred to as frequent flyers. And so if the commissioners don't believe that the punishment suits the crime, we are free to reject that stipulation and send it back and have investigators renegotiate with the offender, or the offender can move to bring it to a hearing, which doesn't happen very often. Right. Can happen. Okay. So yes, we are aware of the inconsistency in penalties.
Well, I'm thinking of one that happened here years ago, but the law was actually broken, and you know, it was a $5,000 fine and 6-month license suspension. And I felt that, you know, and that's my personal, when you do what this person did, you don't need to be practicing real estate at all, ever again. And so I didn't know how those punishments were determined.
Well, again, it's what we're presented with is the proposed negotiation between the investigator and the respondent. However, we are free to make adjustments to those penalties, and I think you're going to continue to see more of that.
Okay, thank you.
Like our cooperation with Idaho Realtors, the commissioners have a good relationship with investigations, and they're receptive to our recommendations.
Okay, and I would like to say that anytime I've had to deal with IREC, with Don, or anyone there, they have been very responsive and handled it that day or the next day for me. So there hasn't been any issue at all with me.
Good. Thank you for that. I'll pass that along.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from our audience today? Well, Kim, if we want to give everyone just one more second. I feel like our webinar is winding down, but I want to give you one more chance to kind of speak to upcoming dates and deadlines you want to make our audience aware of. You mentioned a few in your report, but are there any that stand out to you right now that you want to make sure that you share with us today?
Well, they've, as of the 1st of this month, they've already missed the deadline that leads to the most fines, and that is not renewing E&O insurance. No other deadlines that I'm aware of that really pertain to this audience. Just make sure you stay current on your continuing ed credits and your E&O insurance. So we're going to avoid a whole bunch of problems with, and again, those offenses are generally handled internally by staff. And we do have a chart of fines for various items that were overlooked by the licensee. So just be aware, and in your office meetings, let people know. And one thing, I did have something else. We had some discussion about, it came up in one of our meetings from one of our attendees about failing to respond to requests for feedback after a showing. So I had some conversations with Investigator Morse about that, and he said, well, that's to me appears to be an agency violation. And I said, really? So he sent me this. Says the listing agent has an agency duty to buyers as a customer. The buyer's agent owes customer agency duties to the seller. Here's the agency law. 54-2086, duties to a customer. If a buyer, prospective buyer, or seller is not represented by a brokerage in a regulated real estate transaction, that buyer or seller remains a customer, and as such, the brokerage and its licensees are non-agents and owe the following legal duties and obligations. To perform ministerial acts to assist the buyer or seller in the sale or purchase of real estate. So if you're not getting feedback, you're not assisting. The person that's not giving the feedback is not assisting the buyer or seller in the sale or purchase of real estate. So be watching for that, and be watching for people to be receiving a letter of reprimand or whatever for not providing feedback. And I know for most of you that's a sticking point, that it's one of the things that annoy us on a weekly basis. So please educate your coworkers that feedback, if they fail to give feedback, they could be in violation of the real estate law, Idaho real estate law.
Thank you very much. Are there any final questions for Kim Cooper? Well, seeing none, Kim, I just want to thank you one more time for joining us for this Wednesday webinar. We are so grateful that you have the time to give to us and make time to speak to us and our members on behalf of IREC. So thank you once again. Any attendees on this call who are interested, we will make this recording available tomorrow on our YouTube channel and on our social media. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Kim, thank you once again.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate the opportunity to put IREC in front of everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.